if you have a pond on your garden railway, inevitably you're going to want to cross it, and that's exactly what I want to do. Which would be easy if we could cross it straight. But we can't, because I've made my life hard. So on our railway, we need to cross it on a constant radius, across the edge of the pond, from some stones that aren't straight at either side. They're at least pretty level. We've cut out a little bit of this side and we'll have to do the same at that side. But getting all this to match up on a bridge, on a radius, is going to be quite the challenge. But let's see what we can do. So first, we need a design. And for that, I'm going to throw you over to past me, who's actually future me, because I haven't filmed this bit yet, but we'll ignore that and just say it's past me. So over to you, past me.
Ooh, loco. Yes.
Oh, hello. Bridge! That's why you're here. Right. Stop buying locos, Rob, and build a bridge. For the pond bridge, we have a few aims. We've already discussed some of them. We need it to go between the two stones across the corner of the pond, and we need it to be on a radius. 1,220mm to be exact. Or 4 foot if you're old and American. We also need it to be wide enough to run pretty much anything across. So I've said it's going to be 150mm on the inside. Inevitably somebody will bring something big and it won't fit across, but tough luck, that's what I've picked. The other thing I'm going to have as an aim is to have a solid bottom on the bridge. Now this might seem a weird thing to put as an aim, but this has come about because a friend of mine mentioned they'd put a bridge across the pond and it had dropped things into the pond, or the locos had dropped oil, all sorts, into the pond, and that had killed off the fish or wildlife or whatever is in the pond. So I'd already made the decision that we were going to cross the pond. Their advice was don't go across it, but I'd already put that in as that's what we're doing. So I'm going to put a solid bottom on this bridge, with the idea being that things can't drop into the pond. It'll sit on the bridge itself in the ballast and burn off later or disappear or at least be diluted anyway. So that's the reason for the solid bottom. The other thing is I want low sides on this bridge, and that comes back to an original idea I had when we first started to draw this line up, that I wanted to be able to see through the bridge. Now obviously the solid bottom doesn't help with that fact, so what I'm actually going to do is have a lower profile to the bridge side so that it's not hiding all the pond behind, and you get a nice shot of the loco going over the low-sided bridge with the pond behind, rather than have big sides up or supports and things like that. So I had to think about this and had to come up with the design, but first I had to work out how the base of the bridge is going to work, because I knew I had to do something structural and then make it look good later on. So we drop into Fusion, which is what I'm using to design this, and the first thing I had to do was get the two ends of the stone walls in Fusion with the radius plotted on. Now I can't physically bring the stones in here and put them into Fusion, that would be far too easy. So I had to try and get stones that are in space and none of it lines up with anything square into Fusion. So I went old school, got a piece of cardboard, laid it on the stones and just traced it out and drew it underneath. Brought that into here. I have now lost the piece of cardboard, but then drew on it, put all that into Fusion, and that has got me the positions of the two stones at each end and where the radius comes across them. So I know now I can build my bridge between these 2 points. So the next thing I had to then do was put the actual bridge in. And at this point obviously I need to know the width of it, which is a bit of a calculation based off how big the side's going to be and things like that, and where position of the sort of track and things like that. But that effectively, with the two stone ends, gets me the bridge we need to build. Then, many days and hours and everything else into this project got me to this stage. This is the structural bridge, and it's made up of a few different parts. So to start with, the main structure of the bridge is going to be aluminium angle, and it's used a lot in 16mm bridges because it's easy to work with and it's strong enough for what we're going to use it for. So these aluminium angle sides are actually the thing that's going to be taking the weight of the bridge. You'll also see the solid bottom in it. This is probably going to be a piece of acrylic sat into the bottom of the bridge, so isn't really structural because it won't be strong enough, but it is keeping the bridge sides in the right position. The other thing we've got on this design is underneath we have cross supports, mainly to support the track, but also the base is obviously sat on them as well, and they're going across in the radius of the bridge. There will be, or will need to be, something at each end as well, but I haven't put those on my design because I'll work that out when I actually come to fit it. So this got me the bridge across. I could run the track across that and all will be good and I could leave it at that. But that's not really a good looking bridge. We need something more aesthetically pleasing for this end of the line. So then I had to come up with what I want it to look like. With low sides, I had to put it around online and I found this photo of a beam girder bridge, I believe they call it. And this seemed to fit what I was wanting the side of the bridge to look like. Low sides, industrial looking, fit with a solid bottom on the bridge as well. And I thought, that's going to be quite difficult to build in metal or something else. What I need is some sort of 3D print. If only I knew where I could find one. And then I realised I have one right here. So that would make it easier. So I took that design and drew it up. And this is the result. And yes, of course, I had to name the bridge. So we've got the sides on the bridge, which hide all the aluminium angle and make the bridge look as it should do, without actually having to put any of the weight through the aesthetic sides. These sides will be split up and printed at a later date, and how they actually fit is a slot over the aluminium sides. If I take off a couple of these, you will see there is a slot in this side and it just sits over the top of the aluminium. If that doesn't make sense, it will do later on when I show you it. But that means, for now, we can build the aluminium bridge and think about the aesthetic bit later on, as it's not structural to the bridge at all and actually doesn't even need to be fixed to the bridge, it can just literally slot over. So now I've got this really nice looking bridge, I have to actually physically make it. And to do that, there's no point looking at that photo of it, that's not really going to help me that much. I'm going to translate this into a drawing, which is what I've done. So with this drawing, I've based it off the base of the bridge, because that's the important bit here, is the base, because the aluminium sides are going to bend around that. So if I can cut the base first, then I can make all the sides fit, all the supports and everything else around it. So because that base is all based on a radius and none of the sides or anything is square, I've put a lot of square lines on this so I can try and measure off those when I'm actually drawing it out on my piece of board. And so I'm going to take that drawing and I'm going to print it now so I can hand it back to myself. So thank you, printer that's definitely not a person behind the camera. I'm going to give this to future me that's messaging me from the future, I think. Anyway, over to you, future me.
Thank you, past me. So, we have our drawing of the design. We have a design that we're going to put on. Now we just need to translate this piece of paper into something that the logo can actually run on top of, because the paper isn't going to do it. So what we need to do is take this and try and lay it out on something that we can then cut. And what we're going to start with, which is what's on this drawing, is the base of the bridge. Because from that we can then make the two aluminium sides and sort of build up from there. So let's go to the workshop. For some reason in the workshop there is a lovely piece of ply to work on that we can draw our radius centre point from, and some acrylic we're going to make this out of. It's almost as if it was planned. Anyway, even better for me is this piece of acrylic I didn't actually buy. It was in the house that we bought that all this railway had been built in. So that makes me feel even better. Especially when I inevitably screw it up and have to buy a piece. But anyway, what we're going to do first is find, as we're on a radius, the centre point of the two radiuses we're going to cut this from. And yeah, that's why my acrylic isn't quite big enough to get that radius point. And obviously I don't want to buy a piece because it came free. So we're going to put the radius point back here, and then work from that to get all of our curves and everything, and go on from there. So let's go to a time lapse of me probably scratching my head quite a lot and wondering why the numbers don't match up in reality than they do on the old computer motherfucker. It'll all be fine. Let's give it a go. So, I've got it marked out. At least, I'm pretty certain I've got it marked out where it needs to go. It's a little bit tricky translating something done on a computer design that's got lots of decimal places to something on a piece of board lying on your garage floor. But, I'm pretty certain I've got it right. And I have built in quite a bit of flexibility into the design, well, what I thought would be enough. And I'm not going to cut these weird ends that you've seen on the plans until I've actually got a bit further on in the process, because they can be cut really wherever. I just did them on the design to neaten it up. So let me see if I can show you on the camera what I've done. So what you'll see just about is the lines that I've drawn across, and I'm right up against the top of the board at this point, and you'll see the weird jog at this end. And so what I used was this stick, which is screwed down at one end, and that's the centre point for the radius. And then it's got holes in for the pencil to fit in, which is my fancy marker pencil, but they fit into the holes, which then gave me the chance to sweep round
to get the right radius. So that can sweep around the full radius, don't put things in the way, and get those marks. There is just about, the camera probably won't pick it up, but there is actually a centre line running down this as well, which is how I'm able to get each end done off that centre line, which is what was shown on the plan. So the next step is to take this, put it onto another board, because I'm going to hold it down, probably another board to make it easier to cut, and jigsaw this out and see how close to the lines I can get it. So let's do that. So I'm all set up here for cutting it. I've swapped my rough blade in the jigsaw, which is what I'm going to use for a fine tooth blade, which should cut this fine. What I didn't realise when I drew all this out was there was a crack right in the centre here, which is really annoying that I didn't spot it, and actually when I've lifted it up it's got worse. So I'm probably going to have to do this again, but I'm still going to cut it because it takes a while to draw out. So I'm going to cut it, see if I can actually strengthen it, because to be honest this bit's not doing anything for the bridge structure. This is purely just the base to stop anything going down into the pond. The aluminium's actually the strength bit, so I'll see. I might recut it, I've got plenty of sheet if I need to. But let's see first, I'll use it as a practice run, if I can follow a line. Let's do it. Well, that didn't go to plan. It appears there's more cracks in this sheet than I first thought. Back to the drawing board, I think. So, after the disaster of trying to cut this out, well actually, I say disaster, because you see, I carried on, put a bit of tape over the crack that appeared. I worked out what it was. There was a crack in the sheet and I went a bit too quick, but I did carry on and I got a piece out. It's far from ideal. It has some tape holding pieces in, but we'll give it a go. If it doesn't work, I can always cut another one, but it'll actually do for a mock-up even if it doesn't work completely. So I didn't do the ends. They're just roughly cut where they're needed. In fact, that one's definitely not anywhere close. This one's close, but we'll trim those up if we decide to use this piece. The main bit I'm interested in is this arc, which isn't perfect. There's a notch in the middle here where that crack is and things, but it's close enough that we might just be able to make it work. So now I've got this, we now need to take the aluminium sides that we're going to use. So the main sides for this are this 23.5 millimeters by 43.5 millimeters, which I'm sure in some sort of imperial weirdo number means something more than why they were doing it in 0.5. But anyway, we're going to use these. These are our sides. They're going to sit up like that. Track bed sit on there, and our bridge sides sit over. But obviously these are straight, and we need them to do that. So in order to do that, we're going to have to cut these and make them bend. And how we're going to do that is we're going to take this smaller edge and cut it. So these are the small pieces that are going to go underneath. They can go out of the way for the minute because we don't need those. I'm going to sit this in my saw and we cut down, and the saw is actually set so that it'll only go so far and stop, and that will just cut down
enough, but not all the way through. That will then mean that with cuts all the way down this edge, it will actually allow it to bend that way or the other way, depending on what we need. And if you weren't following that, what I can actually do now by the power of teleportation and space and time and continuing everything else is reach into the future and pull one back. Completed. It's definitely in the future. That's not don't be giggling there. So that's how it's going to work. Now we don't actually need a huge amount of bend on this. As you can see, it'll easily bend around where I need it to go. And on the other side, which is the harder one to actually put in place, it will do that and form round, which is what we want it to do. So we're going to put these cuts in, as you can see, and we're going to do them every 15mm about. And we have to have a way of getting those, because to try and measure those out is going to be a pain. So we're also designed a jig down here. So let's have a look at that. So please excuse my shoddy camera work here, as it's sometimes difficult to see. But what we've got in the saw here is a piece of wood. I've already cut a slot at 15mm from the end of this piece of wood. In that slot is a shard of acrylic that fell out of somewhere. I haven't found out where yet, but it's I think it's an offcut, it's fine. With a shard of acrylic in there, I've got a screw just to stop that shard of acrylic going back. Because what we're going to use this for is indexing. I've got a piece of wood on the front here because my bit of wood at the back here doesn't bring this aluminium forward enough to get to the base of the saw when the saw's down. I want it in the middle of that blade so that we're cutting straight down onto this, and the little stop that's on this saw means it stops perfectly. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the first cut at this end, and then that first cut then will index into here, and then it will work its way along here, each time indexing on 15mm. I'm not cutting all the way to the end of here or the other end. I'm leaving a little bit of flat at each end just to grab hold of. I'm hoping it'll make it easier just to bend and put in place and things like that. These are too long anyway, so they'll be cut off. So I'm bringing it in 30mm at each end, and then 15mm, which I can't remember, I don't think it actually calculates to that end, but it doesn't really matter. It's just, we've got that 15mm max. So I will give that a go. So the first thing we're going to do is mark our 30mm in from each end. I only really need it at one end, but it gives me a guide of where I'm going to stop at the other. So we're going to tape our aluminium and our measure and just score that mark in there so they know where we're starting, and we'll do the same at this end. So just using the calipers to mark in the aluminium because it's quite soft. Then we're going to place this in the saw, and this first one's the most tricky because we've just got to get this lined up. So we're then going to try it and cut that. And you'll have to excuse me a second, it will get loud. And as you'll see, we've got our first cut, and it only just goes through. So you can just see there's a little bit of a mark on the inside, but we haven't come all the way through to this side. That's flat. And that's what we want, because then, if I can demonstrate this, you can just see a little bit of bend on there. Now that slot is going to index into our bit of acrylic. Sit it in there, and now we just progress along. Once you've got a few in, it's far easier to pull the stock through, but as you can see, we have a bending piece of aluminium. So I just need to carry on all the way to this end. And as if by magic, we have two floppy aluminium rails. So that's those done. Next, we need to take our small undersports, so these go underneath the deck, and we're going to cut them into 166mm lengths. I'm sure it's 165, but when I've checked the design it's 166. I'm not quite sure where the millimetres snuck in there, but we won't worry. So, set my saw up again to cut us 166, and this time we're cutting it all the way through. So I'll cover up my laser because I don't want that getting all mucked up. Let's give this a go. And that should be 166. Spot on. Did you doubt me? I know I did. So I need another 10 of these. And that gets us 10 of these. So a little bit of filing to do on all those pieces, and then we can come up with a plan of how we're going to get it all together and actually in the right radius, because that's going to be key here, getting this thing to the right radius. I can cut the ends however I like, but I've got to get the radius right. So let's see how that goes. So as you can see, it's progressed a little bit. This took quite a long time to get to this stage, mainly because we have to work out where these rails are going. Because I did this off CAD, it was quite easy to do that off a centre radius, which, unless I use my big board, and I'm trying to save that for something else, and put a load of holes in it and made a jig and everything, it's quite difficult to get that radius. So what I've actually then done is do another drawing. I'm swimming in the things now, which has got me distances between on a radius, and then I also put it in this jig. And I've made this, if you've been watching our main build log, out of flexible edging strip for lawn. We're using it as a bit different but similar idea, but as I've had some, and as it's flexible and can take screws, I've actually used it as a jig to form my two sides on the right radius. And I did that by first putting the acrylic that's sat down here in, putting the aluminium sides in, clamping it, screwing it, easing off the screws this side on the inside, just to allow a bit more wiggle room because the acrylic doesn't need to be tight. I loosened the screws on the inside because I don't mind if the radius is slightly too sharp on the inside, because it'll always want to ease, it'll always want to push out. So it's better to build the bridge slightly tighter radius than you need, because it'll always ease back as the metal wants to go back in position. So I've done half of them so far on this side. I have managed to get 2 rivets in each one, which is meaning that it's wanting to stay square. And now we're going to do the next ones. And what I'll try and do is show you how I'm doing it. So obviously we're putting the pieces of metal in that way on, which means when we try and put them underneath our flat sides like this, they're always going to want to fall over. So I have some bits of wood that just sit in, and they will then stop them from falling over. Also, to make my life hard, I made these angle brackets at the bottom change halfway, so for this half of the bridge they're facing that way, for this half of the bridge they're facing that way, so I need to make sure I get them in the right way. But if we put this one in, you can put it in
and just turn it sideways. So we just need to lift the sides up a little bit, twist it and put it in. And then what I've already done is mark in here where I think the holes need to be. The holes aren't critical, it's actually where the bar is, so I've marked that as well, where the back edge, this flat edge, is on these rails. You get it positioned in, you get it so that the length of the rails is just visible on each side. So these rails are actually just in a little bit from the outside edges of these, which means when you look down you can actually see when you've got them centred, because otherwise I don't really have a way of centering. The other thing I'm using is I've got these spacer bits of wood, and they jam in to make sure that I'm pushing the sides out, so I'm keeping that distance so my acrylic will fit in. And then it's a case of just fiddling about with all this, which is a fiddly job, until you think you've got it about right. And then the other thing you can check with is you can take your calipers, and I have on here the distance between one rail and the next on the outside edge. So I can set this to, currently it's set to 71, which is the inside edge between them, and I can just do a bit of a check in here, say yeah, that looks about right, and then the next measurement is 81. That needs to go across a bit. Now I have to factor in that my measurements on here are on the outsides, and I'm obviously checking it slightly in, so I've got to keep that in mind. Again, the position of these isn't critical. It does match up with the sides that we're going to put on, but we're not to a few millimetres here and there. It's going to look about right. Once that's in place and I'm happy with its position backwards and forwards, which I am now, we're going to drill through. And when we do that, that's so that we can then put the pot roots in. So I'm just drilling one at a time because I don't want it to shift and then the holes not line up. And that's one pot rivet in. So now we just check that the inside edge is still looking correct. Slightly bigger spacer, so I'll put that one in. Make sure it looks about right, and then what I then tend to do is just push it in and out a little bit just to ease it slightly. Another hole, another rivet. And that's basically it. So let me show you how that looks. So as you can see, this is where we've got to this end. Obviously these will want cutting off once we've determined exactly where, but I have put the marks on them where they need to be cut off. So we've got all these in, 2 rivets each side, so all the way down. You can see my spacers in here to keep the 2 sides apart, and you can see on this one we have the 1 rivet and the other rivet, and now we're going to put one on the outside of each and then work our way along to the end. And basically rinse and repeat. Sometimes you'll find they line up with a slot like they did on this one. Sometimes you'll find they line up on sort of in one of the tabs, but you can move them backwards and forwards a little bit because obviously these aren't critical where they are on these bars. So let's carry on. Well, it's the moment of truth. They're all riveted now. In fact, I've put a few extra rivets in the middle here just for strengthening. Will it come out of the jig? Let's give it a go. It will be tight. Actually, before I take it out of the jig, let's put the acrylic in. So the ends are going to have to be bent because they're too long at the minute and they've not got anything to support them. But yes, the acrylic fits. So again, these ends all have to be trimmed and everything yet, but that's fine. That fits in well. Now let's try and lift it out of the jig. Ta-da! One bridge. So yeah, acrylic needs trimming, these rails need trimming. Get my head back into shot, that'd be a good idea. But let's go try it in the garden. That's it, in place. Well, it needs quite a lot of work yet, fettling and a bit of adjusting as to where it goes, but it's in. So the next thing we need to do is work out exactly where it needs to sit and mark the ends that I need to cut, and probably cut the acrylic at some point, but that can stay for the minute. The main thing is getting these rails cut, but then before that I have to think about how this is going to sit on this stone wall. So the plan there is to put another one of these rails that are underneath down the edge of the stone. Some of the weight will be sat on the bigger rails, some of it will be on the little angular one, but just a bit extra stability, and that holds the ends in the right position as well. The two side rails and the right radius. So I'll get these marked up, cut, and the ends put on. However, what is still sat here are some prototype 3D printed sides. So we've just got to try them. Now, these are prototype ones, quite rough, but that's basically how they're going to work. They need cleaning up and everything, but here's how they look. So it's looking a bit different since we last looked at this, mainly because it's changed colour. I painted it black because I'm mainly hiding all the cracks that are in the acrylic, because I still haven't sorted that problem out. But it's gone together, so I've trimmed the edges, fit it in as you can see, even put some track across it. Now it's in place, and actually the acrylic has survived enough that I'm happy enough to use it for now. I might change it in the future, but as it's only really to stop anything getting through the bridge into the pond, as long as it does a good enough job of sealing, the ballast will hold most of the oil and anything else you don't want going in the water that will then burn off later, so that should do its job. So yeah, coat black paint. I've still got the prototype sides on it, so the sides still need doing. They're going to have to be a future job. But other than that, it's in place. I just did 2 extra supports on the ends like I discussed, which is what's taking some of the weight and obviously the ends on there, and it has a bit of flex to it, but like the real thing, when you roll over it with a big loco it might drop a little bit, but it's not going to go anywhere. It's solid enough. So yeah, that's it. Obviously we've got track over it, have run a loco across it, but if you want to see that, you're going to have to go and check the main build log, because I'm going to put it on there, all about the track lane. So go across, have a look at that, and hope you enjoy it. One bridge.
It is recording, but you're fine. You can stop it actually, because I'll just cut this bit. Just stop it now, if you want.